Lying on pedal power now on BBC Two, it's Science Week, the perfect excuse for Adam Hart Davis to get back on his bike.
Hello and welcome to a special programme of local heroes in which every single hero has a special connection with Science Week. Isaac Newton died exactly 272 years ago this very week, and this very week 118 years ago Albert Einstein was born. I've come here to Harrogate because exactly 100 years ago this very week in 1897 the dentist who lived right here at 104 Station Parade, Thomas Gaddis, patented an automatic egg boiler. Now, Dr. Gaddis was a very busy chap. He spent a lot of time filling people's teeth and pulling them out. So although he could put his eggs on to boil, he couldn't be sure he'd be there after the 4 minutes or whatever to take them out at the critical moment when they were perfectly done. And it's no good having an alarm clock either if you're not there. So he arranged this automatic egg boiler. And basically it's a seesaw beam here, and you can see there's a weight on this end, and on this end there's a bucket of water and a bucket of egg. And the bucket of water has got a small hole in the bottom out of which the water is running, so it's getting gradually lighter, and as it gets lighter it'll begin to tilt up, and the idea is to take the egg out of the water when it's perfectly done. Now there are two little problems which he managed to overcome. The first was that some people like their eggs hard and some medium and some soft, so you can move the whole of this assembly along the beam here to suit hard, medium and soft to your taste. But the second is more difficult, because you don't want the egg to come slowly out of the water, you want it to come very quickly as soon as it's done. And so what happens is that as this begins to tilt, you'll see that this weight here will slide along this bit of wire, and the moment this gets below the horizontal, it will go very fast and hoik the egg rapidly out of the water. Are you ready? Look at the weight. The moment the weight goes, out will come the egg, beautifully cooked, absolutely to perfection. And I'm ready for my breakfast. Ouch. There you are, Dr. Gaddis's automatic egg boiler, 1897. People often ask me how I find my heroes. Well, local studies libraries are brilliant, and so are museums. But because I'm interested in inventors and inventions, one of my favourite research haunts is the old patent office, which is an absolute goldmine of amazing ideas and brilliant heroes. I'm on my way to the old patent office right now, and I'm navigating to Southampton Buildings with the help of this very useful street plan. Now, I expect you've used one of these, but I bet you didn't know that the idea was first dreamed up and patented 380 years ago this very week. In fact, it was the subject of patent number 1. And the chaps who patented it were Aaron Rathbone and Roger Burgess. Although there had been patents since the 15th century, the system had become so corrupt by 1603 that James I scrapped them all and started again. The idea of a patent is to give a head start to inventors whose ideas might get ripped off as soon as they're made public. It's a bargain. The king grants you a monopoly on your invention for 21 years, provided that you can prove it is a real invention, that you pay a fee, and that you publish it, which means everyone else can use it when the 21 years are up. Now this is where all the old British patents are stored. These are the new ones at that side, and the old ones start in this far corner. And they're in date order, so they're basically quite easy to find as long as you've got the date. And there at the very top, they're the 1600s, 1617 to 1635, so they've got 18 years worth in this one volume. Later on it's down to sort of 1 day a volume. And now it should be right at the front. AD 67, number 1, patent of Aaron Rathbone and Roger Burgess, graving and printing maps, plans, etc. And here it is, James, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France and Ireland, Defender of the Faith. And it's very clear. It's rather peculiar English, but it's very, very clear. And it says, you know, they only and none others shall and may from time to time during the term of 21 years next, ensuing the date hereof. They're the only people allowed to. So they've got 21 years. And then it's plans and maps of London and the city of Westminster. So there we are, patent number 1. Here we've got 1896, 1898, and here is 1897, exactly 100 years ago. And you remember the first volume had 18 years worth of patents in one volume. Here we've got all that lot, top shelf right down to the bottom, and in fact I've looked and it's 155 volumes for a single year, so they're really multiplying up. Now the ones that were applied for in March are up here in the top shelf, and I've found some real crackers in here. You can open it almost at random, and I'm actually looking at a wonderful machine there, I don't know what it is. Improvements in velocipede saddles. This has inflatable cushions, you see, under the back, and a hole in the middle, he said, for hygienic reasons, which I don't quite understand. Now, here's one of my favourite ones of all. Paul Herman, Improvements in Cycles. This is still 19th of March, 1897, and there's some wonderful pictures here. And his cycles are constructed entirely of cane tied together with string. The whole bike, that's including the saddle and the tyres, still made of cane tied together with string. Diagrams here of this must be the front forks, I guess, sort of lattice work. So it'd be fine if you had a sort of endless source of cane or bamboo or whatever it is and string, but I would think very uncomfortable. I wonder if they ever made one. I didn't know whether I should say patent or patent. A pronunciation expert told me patent, but at the patent office they say patent. Yeah. This particular favourite of mine, this is 1797, this is 200 years ago exactly. Nicholas Dubois Deschamont of Frith Street. Here in Soho, there are masses of good places to eat. I know because my dad used to have his office in Soho Square just up the top. But 200 years ago, my next hero was less bothered about the food and more bothered about his cold feet. He lived right here in Frith Street, and his name was Nicholas Dubois Deschamont. Lovely, thanks, that's terrific. Ah, looks great. Thank you. Okay. Cheers, yes. Even in the poshest homes, having dinner must have been a pretty miserable, chilly affair. You know, a little fire over the other side of the room wouldn't do you much good unless you were sitting next to it. So Nicholas came up with this brilliant scheme of a combined stove and table. Here's the table with a hole in the middle, and underneath it there is a stove. Look here. You can hardly miss it. A nice little, oh yes, pot-bellied stove. Give it a bit more wood here. And the point is that the flue went up there and then all the way around, you see, all the way around here, so that all the people having dinner could put their feet on it. And that meant not only do you get nice radiant heat from the stove, but you can put your feet on the flue and actually have warm feet throughout dinner. You don't have to depend on the fire the other side of the room. And as a result, he had brilliant, cosy, intimate dinner parties. Everyone was warm, the wine flowed, the conversation was lively and brilliant because of their warm feet. Now, in his patent, he described how to make this thing, and he said you could have your table square like this one, you could have it round, you could have it oval, and the important thing was that there should be a gap in the side of the table so the servants could come in and stoke the fire when necessary, all for the sake of warm feet. Now, here in Soho Square is the ideal place to tell you about my next hero, William Banting. He was a posh undertaker in St James's, and by the time he was 62, he weighed 14 stone 6, which may not sound very much, but he was only 5 foot 5 inches high, and he found it very undignified. He puffed and blowed going upstairs and couldn't tie his shoelaces. He consulted doctors, and they said, take exercise. So he walked for miles and rowed boats, and it was absolutely no use at all. He consumed gallons of patent medicines and went to 90 Turkish baths. He even tried sea bathing. Couldn't get slimmer at all. And so eventually he consulted a doctor here in Soho Square, Dr. Harvey, and Harvey said, try a diet. Don't eat all this stuff. Don't eat potatoes, don't eat cheese, don't eat puddings. Instead, you should have this. You should have some grilled meat or fish, something like that, and vegetables but no potatoes, he said. And loads of dry toast, he said. That was fine. And so Mr. Banting went on this diet, and lo and behold, he lost 46 pounds. Banting was so delighted that he published his diet as a pamphlet on corpulence in 1863. It sold 50,000 copies and became very fashionable. People at dinner parties would say, "Are you Banting, my dear?" And in this cartoon from 1864, the swell is offering the corpulent cabman sixpence for a glass of beer. Cabby says, "Thank you all the same, sir, but I never take it. I am following Mr. Banting's advice." Now, please listen carefully, because this music was written by one of my heroes. I've come here to Bath to celebrate an amazing pair of heroes, brother and sister, who lived here at the end of the 18th century. They both came here as musicians, but they were consumed by a passion for astronomy and became the most brilliant practitioners of their age. She discovered 8 comets and became the first professional female astronomer. He discovered a new planet and became personal astronomer to the king. Their names were Caroline and William Herschel. Caroline was born exactly 247 years ago this week. At home in Hanover, she was treated as a drudge and was thoroughly miserable until her brother rescued her and brought her to England. When William came to England aged 19, he worked at first as a musician in Durham, Doncaster and Halifax, and he played the violin with John Mitchell, rector of Thornhill, who gave Herschel a telescope. In Bath, William, whose music you're listening to, was organist at the Octagon Chapel, now the Royal Photographic Society. Eventually, he settled here at 19 New King Street, where his astronomy really took off. He made his first observations in 1766. He looked at Venus and an eclipse of the moon, but he quickly realised that his telescope wasn't much good and he needed a better one. The trouble was the only way to get a better one was to make it himself. And the really difficult thing was grinding a good mirror. Now, he needed a magnifying mirror like this one, perhaps a bit bigger and perhaps slightly less magnifying. And this one's actually made of glass with a surface of aluminium or silver. But that technology didn't exist then. What he had to use was speculum metal. Now, here is a bit of speculum metal. It's actually a mixture of copper and tin. And you can see that it's sort of grey and silvery like any old lump of metal. And there's a funny thing about copper and tin. Up to 10% tin, it's called bronze. And that's yellower than this. But when you add more than 10% tin, it suddenly goes more silver. It gets hard and brittle enough to grind, and it gets very shiny. If you look at this, it reflects 75% of the light that's falling on it. And so that made it very good for mirrors. Now, the next stage of the operation was the grinding, and they used cast-iron tools exactly like this one. This is a cast-iron tool. It fitted on top of a thing there, and you can see that it's nicely curved to the curve they wanted, and they would take their speculum, and they would put on this abrasive grit, like sand, for example, and then they would simply rub, pressing down, and they would rub their speculum disc backwards and forwards across this, gradually walking round the table or turning the tool, so they always were exposing a fresh bit of the surface. And they would go on doing this for hours and hours. On one occasion, William was actually grinding a mirror for 16 hours continuously. And his sister Caroline not only cooked the food, but actually fed little bits to him so he could carry on grinding. He was fantastically patient and fantastically hardworking. And by dint of all that, he did in the end make the finest mirrors in the country. And then he mounted them in his telescopes. This is the kitchen at 19 New King Street, and here is a replica of one of those beautiful early Herschel telescopes. As you can see, it's basically a wooden tube, 7 foot long, and down at the bottom end, if I lift this up, you can see the mirror. This is a working telescope, so I have to be very careful with it. Look in there, and you can see a reflection of my hand. And the way you use this telescope is you stand at the top end here. It's a Newtonian telescope, so I look in the side through this eyepiece, and the light from the stars and planets and all that is coming straight down, being reflected up to the secondary here, and then it's reflected this way and into the eyepiece so that I can observe from here. Herschel became a professional telescope maker. He built over 400, charging perhaps £600 for little ones like this, but £3,000 for the real monsters. This is the back of 19 New King Street, and out here in the garden was where Herschel did his observations. And it was in this very garden on the 13th of March 1781 that he spotted something new in the sky. At first he thought it was a comet, and he dashed off a letter to Neville Maskelyne, who was Astronomer Royal, and he got very excited by it. But unfortunately, this thing was in Gemini, and that meant that during the summer it got too close to the sun and they couldn't see it anymore. And the first time they could see it again was in September. When they did see it again, they realized it wasn't a comet at all. It had to be a new planet, and that was sensational. Nobody had discovered a new planet for hundreds and hundreds of years. So then there was sort of uproar, pandemonium, and the question came out what to call it. And Herschel said, oh, let's call it Georgium Sidus, Georgia's star, after the king. And of course the king was dead chuffed about that. They were both Germans and they spoke German together. And the king said to Herschel, why don't you come to Windsor and be my personal astronomer and I'll give you a nice salary. And William said, yeah, thanks very much. Well, in the end it wasn't called Georgia's star after all. It was in fact called Uranus. And by discovering Uranus, Herschel doubled the size of the known solar system. William Herschel wasn't just an astronomer, he was also a brilliant physicist. He worried about all sorts of things, and one of the things that interested him was the spectrum from the sun. He wondered whether the different colours would have different temperatures. He put a prism on the windowsill and cast a spectrum on the wall. With a thermometer, he measured the temperature of the blue, green, and so on, all the way down to the red. And then he went away to lunch, and the sun moved round. And when he came back, the thermometer was way beyond the red end of the spectrum, but it was still registering warm. He was amazed by this, and he realized then that there must be light that wasn't visible, extending beyond the ends of the visible spectrum. In fact, he had discovered the infrared. Caroline was an extraordinary woman. When she came over here, she couldn't speak any English, she couldn't sing, she couldn't do anything much. He taught her English, he taught her to sing. She quickly became a virtuoso solo singer and sang in concerts all over the place. It was amazing. And then she became an astronomer, and she was an absolutely brilliant astronomer. This is her magnum opus, her great work, her triumph. And if you're not an astronomer, this is fantastically boring because all it is a list of stars and their positions. But if you are an astronomer, it's gold dust. Indeed, Caroline got a gold medal for it, and the king gave her £50 a year for being William's assistant, which almost certainly made Caroline Herschel the first ever woman professional astronomer. Most of us don't think very much about how we walk. It's just one step in front of the other, plod, 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 till you get to the pub, or in this case to the running track. But my next hero studied how things walk very carefully. In fact, not only walk, but trot and canter, and he became extremely famous. He was born right here in Kingston upon Thames on the 9th of April 1830. His dad was a merchant, and his name was Edward Muybridge. In 1851, he went to America and eventually settled in San Francisco, where he became a photographer. Now, there was a lot of argument at the time about how horses run. In particular, did they ever have all 4 feet off the ground at the same time? Some people said that would be impossible because they'd fall over. Other people said, yes, of course they did, even when they were just trotting. Eventually, a powerful tycoon, the president of the Central Pacific Railroad, Leland Stanford, decided he had to know the answer, so he hired Muybridge to find out. Muybridge knew that in the bright Californian light, he could just about freeze the motion of a horse by taking a photograph with a short shutter speed. He invented a special fast shutter which could be set off by a horse breaking a tripwire. This was long before the movies, and each camera could take just one exposure. So to analyze the motion of a horse, he set up a series of up to 24 cameras and tripwires, which the horse would set off in turn. I've got 12 cameras lined up along here, each one on its tripod, and I want to arrange to fire off each one exactly as I go past on the other side of the track. So I've got to arrange tripwires to do that. Now here's my tripwire, and you can see it goes across the track and it sticks into the camera. Now, there are various ways of setting this off. He tried an electromagnetic system, and I've actually set up for that. Now, if you look up at the top here, you'll see there's an electromagnetic system. There's an electromagnet which would hold this up, but actually that's rather difficult in this cold weather because the batteries don't work very well, so I'm relying on gravity. So I've simply put my plug in a hole at the bottom of the shutter, and when I trip through it at the other side, it'll pull it out and the shutter will drop. Now, the way the shutter works, you can see there's a slit in it, just a narrow slit, about 8 millimeters wide, and it simply goes in front of the camera lens. So as this drops, it sees black, 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 and then for a 300th of a second, it sees light through this slit as this slit drops. So I calculate that's a 300th of a second exposure, and that should freeze my motion, even though I'm flashing past at an enormous speed on the other side of the track. Now, you'll notice, if you look very carefully, that I've arranged that the strings are at an angle, and they're tied 4 feet further along that way at the far end than they are here, because I've calculated that I shall actually travel 4 feet in the time it takes this tweak to pull that out and the shutter to drop. That means that I'll be exactly opposite each shutter when it goes off. The reason I put Muybridge in this programme is that it was exactly 115 years ago this week that he came here to the Royal Institution in Albemarle Street to show his pictures to the Prince and Princess of Wales, the Duke of Edinburgh, a whole lot of other royal family, and also the Poet Laureate, Alfred Lord Tennyson. This is it. This is the lecture theatre at the Royal Institution. This is where they do the Christmas lectures, and it was here that Muybridge entertained royalty and the Poet Laureate with his wonderful moving pictures of horses. And this was how he did it. This is a duplicate, a replica of his zoopraxiscope, which he invented to show these pictures. There's a great lantern at the back here, an incredibly bright light inside it, you can see sort of bursting out at the edges. And then away over in front, there's a lens, which is going to focus the pictures on the screen over on the wall there. And then there's some nice brass gubbins here, which is the shutter, and a bit more shutter here, counter-rotating shutter. And the really exciting bit is the glass disc here. And if I shove this bit of paper behind it, you'll be able to see the pictures better. Now, these are painted pictures of horses. And the reason they're painted is that his original photographs were glass plates. Obviously, he couldn't stick great big glass plates onto the glass disc. So what he did was to take the glass plates, give them to an artist. I don't have a glass plate. This is one of my slides. And he said to him, paint exact copies of this picture directly on the glass disc. So these have been painted on, and these are exact copies, a little bit stretched because he knew they'd be compressed when they were projected. And he made them coloured, even though the originals have been black and white, because obviously they look more realistic coloured, and then the audience would be more impressed. So this is a copy of an original set of Muybridge pictures. And you see the pictures are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the horses' feet are in different positions. And the idea is if you spin it round, you project the pictures one after the other, and you can actually get the impression of the horse cantering or trotting or something across the field. Let's spin it and see if it works. The zoopraxiscope cleverly uses a spinning slotted disc to freeze the images, which would otherwise be a blur. As the slot scans across the horse, each bit of the image flashes onto the screen. The eye puts all the bits together and sees the whole horse, but I'm afraid television doesn't work like that, so we've animated the disc by stopping it at each horse and taking a picture and then putting them together. Using the same technique on Muybridge's original photographs shows what a magnificent technique he'd invented. Imagine how this must have stunned audiences years before the first real motion pictures. Naturally, Muybridge wanted to get the most out of his idea, so he analysed the motion of all sorts of animals and human subjects. I wonder what this Californian gent must have thought when Muybridge asked him to slip out of his things and play a spot of cricket. Of course, Muybridge was easily able to settle the original question. Here you can clearly see that, yes, a galloping horse really does have all its legs off the ground at the same time. OK, so we know that the Muybridge pictures work. The question is, do my pictures work? That's what interests me. And here they are. I've taken another Muybridge disc, and I've stuck my pictures on. You remember I had 12 cameras all lined up. Here they are, pictures 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way around to 12. With luck, if I put this disc in the machine and spin it, then I should see an elegant, moving representation of myself leaping over that gigantic hurdle. So there's only one way to find out whether it works or not. Ah, look at that. I'm running and jumping exactly where Muybridge's horses ran and jumped 115 years ago.
Actually, it's a bit disappointing. You don't really see much leg action. I think because my cameras were too widely spaced and captured the same moment in each stride. I'd like to take my hat off to a real master, Edward Muybridge, who showed the world how animals move.
Sometimes, when I'm filming on location, I wake up in the middle of the night, and just occasionally I have one of those brilliant ideas, you know, the ones you get in the middle of the night, but by the morning it's gone. Well, it would be if it wasn't for Christopher Pinchbeck Jr. Now, picture the scene. It's the middle of the night, it's pitch dark, and I'm going to make it pitch dark for me, even though you can see what you're doing. And he's lying in bed, and all his family are in the bed with him, and he doesn't want to wake them up. And he has this brilliant idea. Now, the obvious thing would be to switch on the light, but of course the light hasn't been invented, and he can't light a candle because matches haven't been invented, so he has a pad by the bed and he has to write in the dark. And that's okay, except that if he had another idea, he might write it on top of the first one, and then he wouldn't be able to read either of them. So, here comes his nocturnal remembrancer. He said, you take a case, and this case could be made of gold or silver or anything that you make cases out of. So I've chosen a bit of MDF and a bit of plastic on top. And then he said you have a pad made of ass's skin or goat hide, and I've chosen paper because that seems to be a good thing to write on. And he said in the side of the case there's a hole for your pencil, and here it is, here's my pencil. And you'll notice the most cunning thing is this slot here. And that defines where you're going to write. And in that, you write your brilliant idea. And the one I just had was paint rhubarb. Paint rhubarb. I do have, just occasionally, these brilliant ideas in the middle of the night. Okay, I've written that. Now, I want to make absolutely sure I can't write on top of that, because it might be, you know, the magnificent idea of the century. And so what I do is to slide the pad up. And you'll see, up here at the top, there's a spring. And when I slide it up, that spring will drop into the next notch in the pad. And I can feel that. There it goes. And now I know that inventing the rhubarb is safely concealed behind the case. I can't write on top of it, and I've got a nice clean bit of paper there. Indeed, I've had another idea while I've been talking, which is, why don't I invent the bedside light? Because that would make sure I don't need this thing anymore. So invent light. And then I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost, so I'll push that up too till it gets to the next notch. And now my brilliant nocturnal notion is preserved for posterity, and I can sleep easy thanks to Christopher Pinchbeck Jr.
Sorry, that's all the heroes for this week. See you next time.
And Science Week continues later tonight with the story of Sir Frank Whittle and his plans for the first jet engine. That's BBC Two's Horizon at 9:25.